Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, Chris Finch gets a contract extension. We'll talk about that, plus a couple more players to review. The draft is tomorrow. Wednesday night is the first round of the NBA draft. We've got two more players to discuss today as possible fits for the Wolves. Two more point guards. Could they be the Mike Conley successor, or at least his backup this year at the point guard spot? It's all coming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, and actually the Stanley Cup Finals came to an end last night, NBA's over, the sports stops sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Happy NBA Draft Eve. The Wolves last year did not have a first-round pick. This year they do. Pick number 27 plus 37 on Thursday night, the first year that the first and second round have been split up. So a very relevant conversation, of course, has been ongoing the last week or so here on the show related to the Wolves draft. It is fun. It's a lot more fun having the Wolves having been in the playoffs and still having a draft pick, even if it is at the end of the first round, versus back when they were always in the lottery, or last year when they were a playoff team, but they were out early and they didn't have a first-round pick. This is the best of both worlds. So a couple more prospects to talk about today. We will talk about the Chris Finch extension here quickly off the top, and I'll also kind of update on what we're going to do for Wednesday's show and what the rest of the week looks like here on Locked On Wolves. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can also find on YouTube, and you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. And also a reminder about the Locked On Sports Minnesota app that you can get on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV, another place you can watch Locked On Wolves. All right. So Chris Finch's extension, this was announced, first reported by Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN late afternoon on Monday. And it was shortly thereafter confirmed by the team. The Timberwolves announced that they had signed Chris Finch to a contract extension. We know it's a 4-year extension that goes through the 27-28 season. And there's no terms announced. The team doesn't announce terms. There's no terms announced in terms of, or reported, I should say, from Woj about how much he's making. There's been a lot of coaches have gotten raises lately, and no doubt Chris Finch did too. It's interesting, although perhaps not surprising, this still got done in the midst of the ownership dispute. The arbitration that's coming up here later this summer at some point in July or August is when that'll take place. But Chris Finch doesn't care. He gets his contract. He was going to sign an extension probably no matter what. Of course, Tim Conley added a year to his deal, or I should say delayed the option a year. So Tim Conley could opt out of his contract next summer. Reading between the lines here, that seems more likely than not if Glenn Taylor is still in charge a year from now. But Chris Finch, either way, is now under contract for 4 more seasons. He's been the Wolves coach now for 3+ years, and of course taking over midway through the 2020-2021 season for Ryan Saunders. And then the next 3 years, the Wolves were a playoff team. They were the 6th seed, then they were the 8th seed after losing and winning in the play-in, and then this year, of course, the 3rd seed in the West, and made it all the way to the conference finals. So much deserved for Chris Finch. I've long been a Chris Finch. It feels weird to say defender, because we're talking about a guy who, was second in coach of the year voting this year and went to the conference finals. Only the second Wolves coach to ever do that. But there's been a lot of, go back to November. There was plenty of Chris Finch slander. Go back to January. For whatever reason, there was still plenty of Chris Finch slander. Yes, the Wolves offense has been disappointing for much of his tenure when that was supposed to be his thing. But taking a 2-big lineup that hardly anybody thought would work and helping the Wolves develop the league's best defense this year, and also improving the offense. It wasn't very good 2 years ago or the year before this one. It was much better this year. Even if collectively it finished only a few slots better league-wide, the highs for this year's offense were much better than the year prior. And clearly this team continues to make progress. But it's so much of it is about Chris Finch's demeanor, the way he handles himself, the way the players respect him, his direct. He's at the same time laid back, but yet direct with the players. It's not direct in a Tom Thibodeau yelling, screaming way. It's direct in a different way, a more respectful man-to-man, like, hey, I respect you as a player. You respect me as the coach. I'm gonna give it to you straight. I'm gonna have the difficult conversation, but I'm overall gonna have a more laid back demeanor, and that's Chris Finch. And players love it. Anthony Edwards obviously is vocal about loving Finchy, and all the players seem to really enjoy playing for him. So congratulations to Chris Finch. Obviously well deserved, and he'll now be the Wolves coach for the next 4 years. All right. Let's talk about two more potential draftees for the Wolves. And I've had a bit of a focus on a little bit more on the guard spot over the last week, because that's, the easily identifiable place the Wolves need to shore up is backup point guard. And we're going to spend some time today on two potential backup point guard draftees, the players I've talked about so far. And actually, let me say this. On Wednesday show, tomorrow, I'm going to do my Wolves big board, if you will. I'm not going to talk about the guys at the top of the draft that there's no way they'll be down there at 27 and the Wolves aren't trading into the top 10. So I'm going to start with guys that could go late lottery, but also could slide to 27. And this is essentially, it's pretty arbitrary. I just picked, so far we've talked 10 guys. I'll add a couple tomorrow. I'll probably go up to the 12 to 15 range of players that I will rank as potential Wolves picks at 27 and 37. Players that I like in the order in which I would rank them if they were all on the board at 27 and eventually 37. So the players we've talked about so far on this show, talked about Keyshawn George from Miami last week. We talked about Baylor Shireman out of Creighton. We talked about Johnny Furphy from Florida. We talked about Tyler Kolek from Marquette. We talked about Cam Christie, University of Minnesota, and Terrence Shannon Jr. From Illinois. And then we also talked about Juan Nunez out of, playing out of Germany, but he's a Spanish point guard. We talked about him on yesterday's show as well. Today, we're just going to do two more players. We'll talk about two more guards, and actually players that I like more. We talked about Tyler Kolek last week. Tyler Kolek's probably going to go before each of these two guys, but I actually like these two guys more than Tyler Kolek. I think they both have better futures in the NBA than Tyler Kolek. Maybe I would certainly say higher ceilings, but I think equal floors, honestly, to Tyler Kolek. So let's start with KJ Simpson. KJ Simpson has a shot at going before the Wolves pick, but he's also got, he's maybe one of the widest ranges I've seen when I've looked through mock drafts. In fact, the Ringer had KJ Simpson as the Timberwolves pick. And when I first kind of introduced the draft conversation last Wednesday, I dismissed this out of hand. I said, I don't love KJ Simpson. I don't love him as a pick for the Wolves at 27. I'm going to amend a little bit what I said. No, I would not pick him at 27 if I'm the Wolves. I would consider him at 37, and we'll talk more about that. I'll explain why here in a minute. But the Ringer at 27 is about as high as anybody's had him. The Pistons, the Pistons. I'm just looking at pick 53, the Pistons. This Yahoo mock draft has him at 53 to the Pistons. This ESPN mock draft has him at 52 to the Warriors. Let's see, where else do we have him here? CBS has him second round. But anyway, the range is anywhere from, I said late lottery. It's probably more like early 20s, but the Wolves at 27 is kind of the earliest that I've seen him in multiple places, but potentially going all the way into the 40s and 50s. And KJ Simpson is a prospect. You just look at his numbers and it's easy to go, okay, he averaged 20 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists, and shot 43% from three last year. Why is he not being talked about as a higher draft pick? Well, the number one reason is his size. He, with shoes, is about 6'2", without shoes measured under 6'1". And the second reason is he played at Colorado, and that's not his fault, and I don't think it's fair. Certainly the competition level wasn't quite what it would have been if he was in a different conference, but I think in general, if he had done something similar, like if you want to take off a couple points per game or whatever, if he played at a different school, fine, but the more exposure would have put him higher on people's boards. I think he's better than getting drafted in the 50s. I don't think the Wolves should take him at 27. What I want to do next is dive into his profile as a prospect, why I would be okay with the Wolves taking him at 37, and then we'll also talk about another point guard today. We're going to talk about Jamal Shead out of out of University of Houston, and why I actually like Shead better as a prospect and better as a fit with Minnesota. We'll talk about both those guys here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But now that the finals are over, the Stanley Cup is over, and college baseball is over too. It's really the WNBA and baseball. That's really all we have. Just get fewer games over the summer. The sports are not sportsing like we all want them to. But FanDuel lets you keep the sports going whenever you want. All you have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that you're in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. Of course, that includes MLB. FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Do you watch Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? If so, no doubt you have to turn down the volume because of all the shouting. Instead, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, so KJ Simpson. KJ Simpson played 3 years at Colorado and didn't start. He started one game his freshman year. Not a whole lot to write home about as a backup point guard. Second year at Colorado, he started to come on a little bit, shot 40% from the field, 16 points per game, 4 assists, 4 rebounds, only 28% outside the arc. But then this last year, he exploded offensively, averaged nearly 20 points per game, nearly 6 rebounds and 5 assists, a steal and a half for the second straight year, and he shot 43% from outside the arc. Now, I mentioned his size earlier. He's only 6'2" with shoes, which is maybe a little generous. He's probably more like 6'1.5" with shoes. Wingspan 6'4.5", so pretty good wingspan for his size. He also only played 3 years at college, but he's almost 22 years old. There's a lot to like about KJ Simpson. I think the headline for me is he's just a really good scorer, and 20 points per game is at a Power 5 school that's notable. And that's kind of the bottom line is he knows how to score, and it was relatively efficient as well. I think he's got really good overall feel in pick and roll. I think he's got good feel in the open floor. He knows how to pick his spots, and he can hit a variety of different types of shots. He can hit tough shots. He can finish in the paint. He's athletic. I think he's athletic enough. It certainly doesn't jump off the page. But I think the athleticism combined with the length, the wingspan of nearly 6'5", I think he's crafty with the ball in his hands. I actually think he's got a pretty good shot of being a decent NBA scorer. I think the ceiling is limited because the athleticism is just okay, and I'm not convinced with the shot. I think sometimes the shot doesn't look super comfortable. And I always am a little bit nervous about a guy who didn't shoot it well for a couple of seasons and suddenly gets 16 points better outside the arc. Now, to be fair, improvement's a real thing. And he went for, he's 20 years old. And then when he turned 21, he continued to improve when he was playing basketball every day at school. He's a good free throw shooter. He's 83% for his collegiate career. So I could be wrong. The 3-point shot could be there to stay. I worry about the jump from sub 28% to greater than 43% outside the arc in the course of a season. Is it really somewhere in between there? Is that really an outlier? Obviously, you get the longer distance 3-point line at the NBA level. I tend to think he's not probably a 40% 3-point shooter at the NBA level. And so all that to say, he still managed to score 20 a game. He did that. And he knows how to move without the ball. He knows how to move with the ball in his hands. I also really like that he's such a good rebounder for his size and for being a guard. He averaged 6 rebounds per game, had a rebound rate of nearly 11%, which is a really solid mark for a college player. Defensively, he was really good. Like, also a strong defender. He's undersized, and so he's going to be targeted. We talked about this with Tyler Kolek, and I think he's a better defender than Kolek because he's just an okay athlete, and he's small, even with a good wingspan. And he plays hard. I worry about where you hide him defensively. I think you can do it. Clearly, the Wolves played Jordan McLaughlin, who's even smaller, and I think probably similar level of athleticism. So I don't worry too much about that. My biggest concern is all of those things together. It's so hard to be an undersized guard and be impactful at the NBA level. There's maybe a little bit of like George Hill that he reminds me of, where he's going to have to be that good as a shooter in order to stick. If he's a 40% 3-point shooter and he can hold his own defensively, I think he's got a role in the league. I certainly think that's the case. Clearly, he's very, very intelligent. He has very, very clear basketball intelligence. Again, off the ball or on the ball, knows where to be and when, knows when to make the right pass. And he's usually in the right spot defensively as well. And the modest athleticism and the size concerns me a little. The 3-point lack of a 3-point shot, or I shouldn't say lack of a 3-point shot. The 1 year track record, if you'll call it that, if you want to call it that, is a little bit of a concern for me. I think he can hold his own across the board. And if the 3-point shooting is for real, I think the bottom line is he can stick as a backup at the NBA level. I just don't love the value at 27 if you're Minnesota, because I don't think it's clear the shooting's for real. And if the athleticism's only modest and he's a little undersized, is that what you want out of are you going to hand him the backup point guard spot? And I didn't watch him and I like watching KJ Simpson did not make me think of anybody that Tim Conley has acquired to be a point guard. He didn't remind me of Monte Morris, who's also a little bit small. He didn't remind me of, other guys. We've talked about Facundo Campazzo as somebody that he's acquired. Bones Highland, like maybe a little bit of Bones there, but I think Bones is a little more athletic, a little more fluid, bigger, certainly. So I don't know. I don't see it. I don't love. Now, I should also say part of the reason I'm talking about him, the Ringer mocked him to Minnesota, but I should say, I believe it was Jonathan Giovanni. I've got it here. I believe Giovanni said that the Wolves have interest in him. Was it Giovanni? Oh, no. Let's see. I want to make sure I get this right. It's Michael Scotto. So different than Giovanni. Michael Scotto at Hoops Hype says he has his aggregate mock draft has him coming off the board at 49. So again, I mentioned earlier, he's mocked in the 40s, he's mocked in the 50s, he's mocked in the 20s. But Scotto says he's a potential target to watch for Minnesota at 27 and 37. So that goes back to the point I was just making. I wouldn't take him at 27. I don't think Tim Connelly is going to take him at 27. If he's there at 37 and some of the other stuff kind of falls in a certain way, I'd be okay with the selection. I'm not in love with him as a prospect. I'm not in love with the fit with Minnesota. I think there's better point guards in this draft, and we're going to talk about one. Actually, let's just get to him right now, who generally is mocked after Simpson. Not all the time, but a lot of the time, who I actually like more than KJ Simpson. And I'm going to intro who this is here right now. And that's Jamal Shead of the University of Houston. And he's even smaller. I know I just talked about KJ Simpson being small. He's essentially 6'2" with a 6'4" plus wingspan. Shead is 6'1" with a 6'3" wingspan. He's smaller. But I like as much as I like KJ Simpson's feel, I actually like the way that Shead's feel presents itself more, which I realize I'm using a lot of kind of ambiguous, nebulous words. I like how Jamal Shead plays the game. I think he's really tough. I think he's an awesome passer and has this confidence and edge and chippiness that he plays with that I don't necessarily get. And KJ Simpson is a little bit of it. I'm not at all trying to like not KJ Simpson. I'm just excited about Jamal Shead, and I like him more. Not at 27, but at 37. If they're both there, I would take Jamal Shead first. It's funny, too. If you look at the numbers, KJ Simpson's a better shooter. He's a better scorer. There's certainly reasons to like, he's a little bit bigger. But it's the toughness factor for Shead and a couple other things I want to get to related to Jamal Shead that make me feel more comfortable with him as a prospect at number 37. So we're going to get to all that here next, and then I'll set up what we're going to do in a little bit more detail, what we'll do on Wednesday's show. We'll do all that here next. All right, so Jamal Shead, 6'1", 6'3" wingspan out of Houston, and Shead played 4 years with Houston. So he's a little bit older than KJ Simpson. I don't mean to just completely compare them the whole time, but I guess I am talking about 2 point guards. Shead averaged 13 points, a little over 6 assists, almost 4 rebounds per game. He was 41% from the field this year, and for his career in college, he's 41.2%. Just a shade over, 30.9% from three this year, 31% the year before, a shade under 30% from three for his college career. So he's improved not even incrementally, just a tiny bit over the last 3 years from outside the arc. That's not much to write home about. I get it. However, he had an assist rate of over 40%. Nationwide, that puts him in the top 5, less than 2 percentage points behind Tyler Kolek, who's often mocked as a late lottery pick, early 20s pick out of Marquette. Again, a 40.3% assist rate, which is remarkable. And he had a turnover rate of under 14%, just 13.5% this year. So his assist rate increased by almost 11%, and his turnover rate dropped by 3 percentage points, which is crazy. I talked about a solid steal rate for KJ Simpson of 2.7%. Shead had a steal rate of 4.3%, which is really, really good. And actually, I think that ranks up there pretty highly nationwide too. Yeah, he would have been in the top 15 steal rate wise nationwide. So a lot to like there as well if you kind of play that out at the NBA level. What I like most about him is his passing is the biggest thing that stands out in any situation on the floor. If the defense, like just the ability to probe and find cutters, the ability to pocket pass out of pick and roll, the open floor passing ability, the flair he plays with, confident, under control, with an edge to him as well. The attitude, the toughness. I think he's strong too. One of the things that I would say maybe the thing that stuck out the most, if you're going to compare Shead and Simpson, which clearly I am, is even though Shead's an inch shorter with an inch shorter wingspan, I think he actually handles his lower center of gravity better than Simpson. I mean, Simpson's got a low center of gravity too. He's 6'2". But Shead just seems to like be really comfortable in who he is and be really have a solid base with everything he does, have a good frame, good build. As small as he is, he just seems to really have that balance down. Again, I think the best way to say it is handling a low center of gravity even better than KJ Simpson. I think he's a better defender than Simpson, and I'm okay with the slightly smaller wingspan because I think there's like he handles it so well. And I talked already about the steal rate. If you watch him, he's never not telling people what to do offensively. All the time, he's pointing out like whether he's got the ball in his hands or not, what people should be doing. I love the zip he puts on his passes. I love the accuracy on his passes. If he dumps a pass down to a big guy, he knows what hand to throw it to. He knows whether the big can handle a bounce pass or not. And I mentioned the word flair. That's another word to use it. I don't mean it like in a flippant way. Like I think it's an under control flair, if you will. There's a level of maturity. I talked about his low center of gravity. He's always in a defensive stance. He's active on that end of the floor. My main concern, obviously, size and shooting. There aren't very many tiny guards who can't shoot in the NBA. There's hardly any that make it. And that's the biggest concern. But I think he's such a good passer and such a tenacious defender that I think he can make it as kind of an effort to guard. In fact, I mentioned Monte Morris earlier. He actually reminds me a little bit of Monte Morris. Certainly not as good of a shooter as Morris. But I think that the tenacity defensively and the way he plays reminds me more of a Monte Morris and feels more like a Tim Conley player than KJ Simpson does. I would not draft him at 27. He's not going to be a first-round pick. Again, most people have him mocked in the middle of the second round. I should say the Ringer has him mocked at 35, which would be 2 picks ahead of course, the Wolves' second-round pick. Yahoo has him at 46 to the Clippers. ESPN has him 43. So again, right after the Wolves pick. So if his range is 35 to 47, it's going to be, roll the dice, whether or not he's there at 37 for Minnesota and if they take him. But I like him more than I like KJ Simpson. I think that the floor is probably about the same, if not a little bit higher because of the way he plays. Just, again, the tenacity, the toughness. The ceiling certainly lower because of the size. Like, I mean, the ceiling just, I don't know that he's ever, I would not even say his ceiling is as a starter. I would say his ceiling is as like a absolute best case, like a 6-man spark plug type guy. I just don't know that the offense will ever get there scoring wise, but I think he could be a solid backup in this league. KJ Simpson has perhaps upside or starter upside at the NBA level, but I would say his floor is he doesn't stick. And of course the floor is the same for Shead. I just think there's more room in there in the middle. I think KJ Simpson is going to be one way or the other, and it may take him a minute to get up to where the Wolves would need him to be, whereas Shead from day one is going to run that pick and roll. He's going to defend. He's going to get down in a stance. He's going to bully guys despite his size. And I like that. I think that fit for Minnesota would be really solid, despite the shooting, which of course can develop. It's a little bit of the Jordan McLaughlin mentality, and McLaughlin's a better shooter than Shead. But I think Shead's a better passer, as good as McLaughlin can be. There's a little bit, I think he's got a little more juice offensively. I think he's got a better floater than McLaughlin did when he came into the league. So there's potential for him to be better than a Jordan McLaughlin. But if he's there at 37, I think there's potential for him as a backup point guard. I just think there's a limited range of floor and ceiling. Okay. So on Wednesday, what I'm going to do, we've now talked about, I think, 10 guys on the show over the last week. I'm going to give you a big board. I'm also going to play, there's a few videos that our Locked On college hosts have put out related to really likely first round picks. There's a Baylor Shireman video. There's a Terrence Shannon video. There's a Tyler Kolek. There's a Johnny Furphy. Some of the guys we talked about. I think there's a Keyshawn George. So I'm going to play a few of those as part of Wednesday's show. They're like minute-long clips, what you need to know, NBA comps for these guys. So I'm going to play those. I'm going to give you my big board on Wednesday's show and my favorite picks for Minnesota. I've already tipped my hand a little along the way, but it's also shifted a bit. Like, for instance, I dismissed KJ Simpson immediately as somebody I wouldn't want on the Wolves. After spending a bit more time on him, I could see it at 37. I'd be okay with it. He's not my least favorite player that I'm going to put on the board on Wednesday, but he's not my favorite either. He's somewhere in the middle, towards the back end of the top 12 or whatever I end up doing. So big board will be on Wednesday. And then I'll also play a few of those shorter videos. I'll give you my prediction. I'll give you who I hope the Wolves take, who I hope they don't take. And we'll do all that. Also, between this show and Wednesday's show, I say that. No, I think this show will post first. But later on Wednesday, we'll have the Minnesota basketball party. We'll be back. We're off last week for Juneteenth, but we are still doing the show through July. We'll probably take some time off in August and September. But myself, Reggie Wilson, the KARE 11 sports anchor, Jack Borman, formerly editor-in-chief of Canis Hoopus, and Ron Johnson, the Ron Johnson Show, along with Sam Ekstrom of Locked On Sports Minnesota. We're going to talk Wolves draft. We're going to talk Wolves basketball on Wednesday. I'm sure we'll talk Finch extension as well. So all that will be on Wednesday's show. You can catch us live on YouTube. It'll be 9 a.m. Wednesday morning. And then also I'll have the audio right here on Locked On Wolves as well. So we'll have two shows for you. The regular Locked On Wolves draft show. We'll also have Locked On Sports Minnesota, the basketball party right here on the audio feed. That YouTube video will be over at the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel. And then I'll also have a video that'll go up somewhere with Locked On Wednesday night following the Wolves pick. Thursday show, of course, we're going to break down the Wolves pick on Wednesday, whatever happens. And then Friday show, we'll break down their second round pick on Thursday. So a packed week ahead, like 4 shows posted between Wednesday and Friday. So be sure to stay tuned. Of course, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. This show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon at Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.